we are joined with the one and only man of the hour, the man I go to get a workable point of view of what the hell is happening on the ground, Mark Sleboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. Mark, man, I'm so happy to talk to you. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
Jamarl, I'm alive, and I object to being labeled as the man of the 7:15 a.m. hour because that's an ungodly hour.
It is an ungodly hour.
Your time.
I drag my ass out every morning at this time, and it's painful some mornings. This is one of those mornings that's painful. But I'm glad you could join me either way in this ungodly hour. There is so much news taking place around the globe, and I have to start at Syria, I suppose. A group of jihadis, head choppers, all at once invade Syria, taking a conflict that was frozen.
A group is perhaps an understatement.
Well, they were like an army. I mean, for all intents and purposes.
A horde.
I mean, they had tanks, U.S. vehicles, all sorts of equipment, even Ukrainian drone operators, apparently, or trained by Ukrainian drone operators.
I would say trained.
Yeah, so they had a force. I've asked this question once before. I'm going to ask you, how did Russia, Syria, and Iran not know, see, get intelligence on this massive force being accrued in order to invade? I'm still in the dark about that. I mean, is it the Astana agreements where they thought, okay, well, we have an agreement, so no issue? What happened with this?
Yeah, they effed up big time. They seriously effed up. I mean, it is a big cluster F.
Yeah.
Obviously, Russia has a much smaller imprint on the ground, or did a week ago anyway, than they did back in 2015 through 2020. Obviously, Russia still has several air bases, one less now, at least, than they did before. They have the Tartus naval base, but the number of Russian troops actually in the country is or was until a week ago fairly small. My understanding now is that number is rapidly being pumped up, and that a significant amount of the new troops being sent in are either Wagner or former Wagner or used to identify as Wagner, however you want to term that. But obviously, I mean, the biggest failure, of course, is on the Syrian military and military intelligence that they did not see us. Now, I personally know Syrian analysts who have been warning about this for months.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So, how it must have been not willing to see what was coming, in part because of agreements under the quote Astana format, quote unquote, i.e., a frozen conflict deal that was cut with Erdogan. Because this is Erdogan. Let's make that clear. The Russian media, particularly the state media, anyway, is dancing completely around this, right? Because the Russian government is not acknowledging it as part of their, I guess, strategy for dealing with it. Now, obviously, the U.S. has their role, right? Obviously, they were whispering in Erdogan's ear, encouraging him, providing support. They've been providing air cover for Al-Qaeda. They've been strafing the columns of Iraqi popular mobilization units backed by Iran that have been pouring into the country. These are the same popular mobilization units that were instrumental, even the U.S. admitted at the time, instrumental in driving back ISIS in Iraq, right? They were the ground component that did it when the NATO-trained Iraqi army turned tail and ran. These popular mobilization units coming into Syria to deal literally with Al-Qaeda. Let's make that clear. The biggest group involved in this, the organizing group, is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which even the United States admits is Al-Qaeda and a terrorist group, right? Even the United States admits that. But the U.S. is openly providing air cover for Al-Qaeda now by strafing these Iraqi popular mobilization units that are coming in to deal. So obviously the U.S. is deeply involved in this. And we know that the Kiev regime is involved because they've definitely provided some drone training and other training to these jihadis. We've received word of that already in the Western press. The Kiev Post came out with a piece earlier this week openly saying, yeah, our guys were providing drone training to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which, by the way, is Al-Qaeda, right? And outright admitted that, right? But that's no surprise because these jihadis have been fighting for the Kiev regime going back to 2015, right? And this has also been reported on in the Western media. The Sheikh Mansour Battalion, the Dudayev Battalion, openly admitted in press, in the Daily Beast back in 2017 or 2019, Anna Nemtsova. Yeah, they got their training with ISIS, and now they're fighting for the Kiev regime, right? Openly admitted. They did photo op luncheons. Former ISIS jihadis having a sit-down photo lunch with the neo-Nazi Banderite fascists of the right sector, right? I mean, that's how open this exchange between Kiev has been. But still, that's on the small, and it has to be. This is Erdogan. 98, 97, 98%. This is Erdogan. And Erdogan is obviously miffed, peeved, right? He cut a deal with that froze the conflict back in 2019, 2020. And that left him in control of large swaths, basically the entire north of Syria, up to 30 kilometers deep, which Turkish forces, along with what used to be called the Free Syrian Army and a bunch of other groups that were melded together. Now they call it the Syrian National Army, the SNA. And that's somewhere between around 80 to 100,000 jihadis and Islamists under arms, right? On Turkish payrolls that are loyal to Erdogan in occupied Syrian territory. And then, somewhat discrete from that, is what had previously just been contained to northern Idlib. And that's Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the rest of the 31 flavors of jihad that for various PR reasons couldn't be folded into the Syrian National Army, like the Turkestan Islamic Party and others. And they're taking the big share of this, of the credit, but the forces of the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, the Islamists, are also participating in this. And it has to be said, Turkish regular troops are participating in this. They're providing artillery cover, right, for these troops, right? Erdogan is peeved that no political reconciliation has occurred, right, that would basically grant him effective control of northern Syria, which would be devolved into an autonomous Sunni Islamist region that ultimately owed more fealty to Turkey, to Erdogan personally, than it did to Damascus, right? Because it would be all the opponents, all the Sunni Islamists and jihadists, right? That would nominally be still part of Syria, but the officiated, they would actually be de facto Turkish. This is what he wanted. He wanted officiation of this. And part of the reason why is there are still several million Syrian refugees in Turkey, And these refugees are, by and large, the families and sundry of these Islamists and jihadists. And the one thing that the entire Turkish political spectrum agrees on is they hate these refugees. They want them gone.
Yeah.
They're a big drag on the Turkish economy. They're taking low wage jobs, driving down wages for everyone. They're deeply involved in crime and all sorts of things.
So
Everyone wants them gone. They want to resettle them, right? A lot of this territory, you have to remember, was previously territory of Kurdish people, right? Mm-hmm. They've been driven out. And what Erdogan wants to do is receive officiation for resettling other, a mono ethno-religious bloc, i.e. Sunni Islamists and jihadists and their kin under his de facto control in northern Syria. And he wasn't getting this. And he's been extremely pissed off about this. He's been seething, and it's costing him politically at home. And he sees an opportunity here. Russia is still distracted in Ukraine, but that looks like it might at some point be coming to an end. So there's still a window of opportunity to act, but he felt he better act now. Iran has a president who seems who at least when he took office wanted to improve relations with the West, right, and seems adverse to escalation in Lebanon and Israel, right? And Hezbollah just got, the snot kicked out of it, right? They survived, but their entire political and military leadership was decapitated. Yeah. And they were forced, they still fought Israeli forces to a draw in southern Lebanon, which by any standard should be considered a victory. Right, because of the power imbalance and what they went in with, Israel said they were going to, wipe Hezbollah out, and they were going to drive them past the river, and all Hezbollah had to do was survive, and they did that, right? And so that's a victory for them, but they're still in a very bad state. They had to accept a ceasefire that they said they would never accept while Gaza was still undergoing a genocide by Israel. They've accepted that, and Israel has. And CNN admitted the other day that that Israel has violated the ceasefire a couple days ago already 100 times. Which seems to me that it then probably exists more in the violation than it does in the actual ceasefire category. Right. But Hezbollah, which had been an ally, right, and a big part of the anti-Salafist jihadist, regime change attempt in Syria the first time around, they're in a sorry state too. So all of this led up to a situation where Erdogan sees a window of opportunity. He senses weakness and distraction among his opponents, because that's what Russia and Iran are, right? This is really hard for people to get their heads around.
I mean, because it puts me in mind of frenemies more than opponents.
Yeah. So Russia and Iran and Turkey, they have agreed that they are going to have economic relations and strengthened economic relations. Russia and Turkey have great economic relations that continue to grow. Same thing with Iran and Turkey, that they will keep separate from their geopolitical differences, right? Which is hard for Westerners to get their head around, because they go to war with someone, they sanction, they cut off all trade, they sanction your mother and your mother's grandchildren, everyone, right? Down to the 7th generation and anyone who ever knew you in high school, right? This is a way of managing things. They very much want to avoid direct war between them, because they realize how bad that would be for everyone. But they have inescapable geopolitical differences in conflicts in Syria, in Libya, and Armenia, Azerbaijan. Right, all three of these countries, Iran not so much in Libya, but other than that, it's very much a thing. So And here's the problem, though, is because while Russia and Iran have been observing this deal of this separation passively, i.e., they haven't been escalating any of these conflicts. They've simply been dealing with the Turks and the Turkish proxies and then trying to tamp things down. Erdogan, on the other hand, has been observing this in the aggressive sense, right? Well, if things are separated, then I can just go to town with me and all my jihadi pets, right? That's his interpretation of this separation of the geopolitical and the economic. And that's what he's decided to do now, again, right? And he is a cunning and treacherous beast. He is, at his core, he is a bit of a pragmatist, right? But you have to know his background. He is an Islamist. He comes from a Sunni Islamist family and political background. Mm-hmm. And that is very much drives him, his mentality, his worldview to a very high degree. He sees Al-Qaeda as, drinking buddies, whereas he sees the Kurds as terrorists. Now, right. Most of the rest of the world, right, Russia, even the U.S. to a degree, sees things to some degree the other way, other than, of course, Jake, Al-Qaeda is our ally in Syria, Sullivan. Right. But at least the common American people, right, recognize Al-Qaeda as an enemy. And the Kurds, well, they're okay. They're kind of secular. They got decent, or role for women in their society. Yeah, they were a bit lefty and communist back in the Cold War, but, they're over that now, apparently. That is when Russia and Iran and Turkey both talk about dealing with terrorism and Syrian territorial integrity. They mean completely different realities, right? When Russia and Iran refer to terrorists, they refer to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the other 31 flavors of jihad, and the Syrian National Army that are proxies of Turkey. Meanwhile, Turkey means the Kurds. When they talk about Syrian territorial integrity, yeah, Turkey wants Syrian territorial integrity. Right. With Assad gone, preferably, right? I mean, that's right. Under some type of Turkish control, right? Or Damascus agrees to Turkish de facto fealty over northern Syria. Well, that's the language that you have to be careful. So Putin held a conversation with Erdogan like 2 days before this kicked off. Right. Where they supposedly talked about economic matters. And it'd be very curious to know whether Erdogan actually hinted about this and this was discussed. It doesn't seem to be the case. Right. And if they didn't, and Erdogan just talked to Putin and then kicked off another jihad against Syria, where Russian military bases are located, then obviously you can imagine that Putin is pretty pissed. Now, they just talked again. I can imagine he would be apoplectic. Yeah. Yes, well, in the last 48 hours.
They talked a few days, exactly. I would love to be a fly on the wall for that conversation. Man.
Here's the thing. Russia is pretending that Turkey is not involved.
Oh, that is. I mean, I've read through the conversation, and Putin said something to the effect of territorial integrity. We need to work, but there was veiled, pointed pushes to this idea of, dude, we need you to get these, like you say, your pets in line, right? Yeah, right. Yeah. And Turkey is acting like we have nothing to do with this. We believe that, and then I think the con though is the jig is up when he says, they need to listen to the Syrian people. Okay, I just watched those quote unquote Syrian people that Erdogan is talking about chop the head off of a child.
Yeah. So and large numbers of these Syrian people are jihadists from around the world. Exactly. Right. These particularly the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Turkestan Islamic Party bunch, right? I would say they're not really many Syrians among their ranks, right? This is an international Salafist jihad, horde supported by Erdogan. Right.
Hence my point. The jig was up when he said the quote unquote Syrian people. Yeah.
Yeah. So now there are Syrians, but they are Sunni Islamists who do not like for whatever flaws, and there are many flaws in the Syrian Arab Republic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they are a multi-confessional, multi-ethnic country, right? With Shias and Druze, Alawites, right? That's if you want to say the ruling minority, but Sunnis who aren't Islamists, which actually make up the greater part of the population, right? And who don't want to live under this interpretation of Sunni Islam,
exactly,
right? And Kurds and others, but they want a Sunni Islamic caliphate, right? For just a different variation of what ISIS was intended to be.
Exactly.
However much, the State Department may have coached them to say different things. They're nominal political leaders that have nothing to do with the actual jihadists on the ground. We saw that during the first one. But Russian state media is playing see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil about Turkey. On RT, actually had an article last week by a supposed Turkish geopolitical analyst from some center in Turkey who talked that Putin and Erdogan and Pezeshkian would be fighting together against Al-Qaeda. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, either you are a complete moron, or this is the most shameless propaganda that for some reason RT is replicating as part of their, this is Putin. They're trying to give Erdogan an
political space, right?
An exit ramp, right? You can separate yourself from this, right? This is part of that management, that separation of the economic and geopolitical. And because Erdogan keeps saying, "What, we have nothing to do with it. It's all Assad." If he had just agreed to political reconciliation with the legitimate Syrian opposition, then Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and the other 31 flavors of jihad, which somehow are conflated with the legitimate opposition, would not have a thing.
Exactly my point. Right.
It's pure jihadi blackmail. Right. And this is this to me is completely unacceptable. I know there are people. Obviously, the Russian government is prepared to drive this back at whatever cost, right? Russia and Iran and Iraq working together with the Syrian government. But they obviously intend to freeze the thing again and to cut another deal with Erdogan, because Erdogan knows what an important geopolitical pivot point Turkey is between NATO at the West and Russia, between the Middle East, between Sunni and Shia factions, everything. He's at the middle and the important swing one way or the other. Russia can't afford to go to war with Turkey. Turkey controls the access to the Black Sea. The last thing Russia needs is dozens of US and British and French warships in the Black Sea, right?
Okay, so they're stuck with this. Meaning, because my first thought was, okay, well, is this a mistake? Is this one of those things where Syria can finally reunify or bring Idlib back into...
Not going to happen. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen. And the US is still camped out in East Syria, militarily occupying Syria's oil and wheat fields, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the heart of the Syrian economy, or was at one point, right? And that has played a big part in the hollowing out of Syria and thus the Syrian military, right? The salary of a Syrian officer, right? You'd be lucky if you can buy a shawarma with it, right? A monthly salary, right? That's how bad things are in Syria. Very bad economically. And has also been reports, which seem to be pretty credible, that this was planned months in advance, right? Obviously, the U.S. helped getting the gear and the arms there. Yeah. It seems they infiltrated jihadis into Aleppo weeks beforehand, and they were already on the ground to sow the chaos that led to the Syrian army either retreating or just abandoning their positions. Take your pick of the interpretation there out of Aleppo. But remember, in the first Syrian conflict, half of Aleppo never fell to the jihadists, right? Half of Aleppo was always in Syrian government hands, right? Not anymore, right? The citadel of Aleppo never fell in the first conflict, and that's already gone. And the Syrian army obviously is regrouping and has initially managed to hold them back from Homs, but they're pressing hard now. And the Russian Air Force is working essentially 24/7, just bombing and bombing and bombing jihadis as they attempt to storm Homs. Now, whether they can hold them back at this point, I've heard various things of how many are actually involved in this, right? But what polls they have available is there are somewhere between 80 to 100,000 Islamists, jihadis in the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army. And in Idlib, right, or now it's more than Idlib, right, this little caliphate there, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has somewhere around 25 to 30,000. And if you add up the Turkestan Islamic Party and all the other 31 flavors that live under their umbrella there, you're probably talking close to another 50,000. So that's 150,000 Islamists and jihadists. And I've been warning about this on your show and elsewhere, that this is a frozen conflict, but it's just frozen. And all of this problem is still there. And now it's been unleashed. And it's a big problem.
That many people, like when we were talking about the Ukrainian war, for example, when there's a large group of people, you can see it by satellite, you can see it by intelligence, like it's hard to hide 200,000 people, let alone 200,000 jihadis that are just across the border waiting. I mean, they were talking about this on Telegram. Apparently, some of the shows have been talking about it, saying, hey, there's going to be an attack. There's going to be an attack. So it just blows me away that they were caught.
Did they trust Erdogan? The Russian general who was in charge of Syria is already gone. He's been replaced, right? And the guy who replaced him is the general who was in Syria at the time when Russia and Turkey actually had direct conflict. And some 50 to 100 Turkish soldiers were killed. Regular soldiers, not their proxies. So things are very tense there.
Well, how much force can Russia muster and pull from Ukraine in order to try to hold back?
That's a very good question. Yeah. So the Russian army is quite obviously much bigger, stronger, and more experienced than it was in 2015 to 2020. It's a completely different monster now. On the other hand, they're having to deal with the Kiev regime and essentially all of NATO in Ukraine, right?
Exactly.
And they have to worry about other potential flashpoints in Georgia and other places, right now. And there have been all kinds of weird things going on around Estonia and Finland with occasional drone attacks up there into Russian territory. So they can't take...
Wait. I had never heard of that one.
This was a couple months ago. I think we discussed it on your show, actually, right? Okay. And we were talking about how did Ukraine do an attack in Murmansk, a drone attack in Murmansk, right? You remember that, right? So but that was almost certainly out of Finland, right? So Russia has a lot more resources, but they can't afford to use. So right now, my understanding, they're sending Wagner, they're sending some of Russia's best drone operators, that sort of thing. Obviously, they'll be sending more air assets, multiple launch rocket systems, and the like. But they'll probably play the same role they did in the first conflict, right? Their primary goal will be organization, air power, intelligence, and that. The heavy lifting on the ground is going to have to be done by these Iranian-backed Iraqi popular mobilization units and potentially Iranian troops, because officially Iran has put out in the last 48 that they are willing to send official Iranian troops to Syria if the Syrian government requests them. So that's probably in part a warning to Turkey. Now, my understanding is that the Iranian foreign minister spoke with Erdogan also in the last 48, have been much more open, right? If Russia and Iran are the good cop and bad cop routine with Erdogan, then Iran is the bad cop. So evidently there were some heated words there. But this is a bad situation. And neither Russia nor Iran can afford to have Turkey officially join the opposition to them in the larger geopolitical sense. They want to keep this isolated to, this is a disagreement in Syria and it shouldn't affect anything else, which is madness, of course, to a degree, but it's madness that also makes sense in the weird world of realist geopolitics.
Yeah, there's a logic to it.
But
God,
I mean, certainly, I want this SOB put down, right? I hate Erdogan, right? I hate Erdogan more than I hate the Banderites in Ukraine, because he's so treacherous. You know, at least the Banderites are usually open about their hatred.
Yeah, you're clear.
There's going to be an attempt to appease him again. And I think that's the wrong tactic. I think that this has to be put down hard. I think Idlib should have been cleared out the first time.
Yes.
Right? And all of that, if they want to live in an Islamist state, there's one right up there in the north, right? It's Turkey. It's right up in front of you.
Go to Turkey.
If you want to live that kind of lifestyle.
Because now they're in a situation where, like you said, they can't get on Erdogan's bad side because of the other political stuff going on with NATO. By the same token, you don't necessarily, you can't have these jihadis setting up shop on your border.
Yeah.
They're not, because at that point you have another frozen conflict that could be reignited on a whim, just like it is now.
Here's the reality, is that 30 to 35% of the Syrian population are Sunni Islamists and jihadis, or are susceptible to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not what do you do when a third of your now, a greater part is normal Sunnis, right? Separate from the political religious ideology of Islamism, and that is obviously hand in hand with the Salafism, you know. So what do you do? And whenever they have control of that area, like Idlib and all of northern Syria, all of the next generation there is being raised as Islamist cannon fodder, right? The ones fighting now, large numbers of them were kids.
Yeah.
5-6 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Now they're fighters, right? So they're already breeding the next generation of anti-Syrian, anti-Russian, anti-Iranian jihadis.
So what are they going to do? Meaning, like you say, they're going to cut a deal. Okay, but what is that going to mean? For one, I guess, do you think Iran is going to get involved? Do you think that Putin is thinking we cannot continuously have this situation blowing up over and over and over again? We need to resolve this.
They're going to ask Assad to compromise with Erdogan.
Now, what does compromise mean in this case?
there's going to be an autonomous Sunni Islamist part of Syria in the north that is de facto under Turkish. Erdogan is going to get what he wants.
That is untenable. I mean, the reason I said it's untenable is because consider it now. They were able to take Idlib. All right. If this goes through, 10, 15 years after taking Idlib, now they've expanded to Aleppo?
Well, they're going to be driven out of Aleppo, right? They will not accept Aleppo being controlled. But north of Aleppo. They don't expect it
now. In 10, 15 years again. Another push.
It will, right?
That's my point.
Look how close this border is to Russia's border. It's 24 hours by Jeep from a point of Syria to the Russian southern Caucasus. And large numbers of these jihadis in Idlib are Chechen, Ingush, Dagestani, and also from the Central Asian that are Salafists, right? They hate Ramzan Kadyrov and the Chechens in control of Chechnya. So they will be breeding another expat army of Caucasus jihadis in Idlib. And they've been breeding, they've been participating in Ukraine. Now they're fighting again in Syria. They're not going to go away. And their principle, right, is Russia hatred, right? Everything else to the side, right? These Salafists that have been largely driven out of the Caucasus into Idlib and participating in Ukraine, this is a breeding ground for them. But how to root them out of northern Idlib, this mountainous, hilly, it is such a military, it would be a grind, it would be hard, there would be all kinds of, because they live with their families and everything, so it would be civilian casualties. It's a mess. How do you, at some point, the pragmatists say you've got to have some kind of political recognition of this. Now,
I get it. I
don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. And I would have, I think that the current Russian leadership is not cold and brutal enough to deal with this problem.
In 10, 15 years, we're going to be back here. And we're going to be talking about Aleppo.
Look, the conflict in Ukraine, this happened back in 1949 and 1950 when a CIA-backed insurgency of former SS fighters from Ukraine that the U.S. attempted to lead an insurgency. Operation Red Sox. Politico even did an article about it, and they said, yeah, okay, they're Nazis, but they're Nazis with us against the communists, right? This all happened before in Ukraine. This has happened before in Syria, and it will happen again. The problem is these are very difficult social, ethnic, religious problems that there's just sometimes no easy solution to.
Yeah.
And when you have an opponent that is doing everything they can to exploit those divisions and weaponize them against Syria, against Russia. And here we're talking the US, we're talking Turkey, it's very difficult to see a solution. And hands off to the Kremlin, for their attempt to manage the situation with Turkey and limit the geopolitical differences so it doesn't turn into another Russian-Turkish war, right? Because that's the last thing Russia needs right now. Yeah. Erdogan also understands that that's the last thing he needs. Unfortunately, Russia and Turkey need each other economically, particularly Russia right now with Turkey. Yeah,
and militarily,
because
I said, keeping them out the Black Sea.
A lot of the gas that is going to countries in Europe like Hungary and Slovakia and Serbia,
Turkey.
that goes through Turkey. That's Turk Stream, right? Russia is building nuclear power plants in Turkey. Russian tourists go to Turkey, as their number one destination. It's unfortunately they're intertwined to a degree that
you can't touch them. That relationship is sacrosanct. Like you need that relationship. Yeah.
The question is, if Erdogan would have went away, would the solution to him be better or worse? Right? Would it be closer to the U.S.? Would it be more Islam? You don't know. All right. So unfortunately, he's the beast. I'm of the opinion that you want to avoid direct war with Turkey, that the separation is good, but you still, with those geopolitical differences, need to deal with Erdogan from a position of overwhelming strength. You can't show him weakness. You've got to keep your boot on that snake. You've got to keep your boot on that snake.
Otherwise, you're going to be blackmailed by jihadists. Meaning he knows of the relationship. He understands they need me. They can't do without me.
He does.
And if I go, it may be
the way
worse.
He plays the U.S. and Russia off each other again and again and again. I mean, eventually he's going to fail, right? Eventually his ego is going to write checks.
He hasn't up to this point.
Geopolitical position can't cash.
Yeah, he hasn't up to this point, though. Before I let you go, Mark, we have about 4 minutes. Can we get into Blinken telling Ukraine, hey, we need you to put your kids out there? Now, this is pretty wild. 52% of Ukrainians at this point said they want the war over with, even soldiers. This was under Gallup polling. And despite that, you have Blinken saying, yeah, we need people to carry those weapons. Mind you, Blinken is fired. Blinken is on his way out. Yeah, we need people to carry those weapons, so we need you to conscript your 18-year-old
ever really on the way out?
Blinken is. I'm just saying, whoever takes his place, fair enough. But that ass is on his way out. That sociopath. I've watched them grab people off the streets with their mama hitting them with like an umbrella or something because they were dragging their kids off to die. And Blinken is out here screaming, yeah, well, you're going to be a part of NATO, but we need you to bring your kids into this war.
They need to continue the war.
Is this going to matter? The one iota?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's going to happen. I mean, it was always just a matter of time. Yeah. Now, the big problem here, a lot of people don't understand this. Under 25s have never been conscripted in Ukraine. Right. They've been volunteers were accepted, but they have never been conscripted. And the reason for that is the demographic narrowing of the Ukrainian population, the shrinking population. Essentially, since 1990, since independence, Ukrainians stopped having kids, right? Because economic times, corruption, social political tension, they just stopped having children, right? It's a first world problem, but it's so extreme in Ukraine. So you have a large population of 35 and plus 40, 50-year-olds who were born before the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union. And then that population gets much smaller as you come up to the present day, right? That's that 18 to 25. And that's the crucial years when people have kids, right? So if those young men die, the future of Ukraine is gone, right? They won't be able to sustain a population into the future. The population of Ukraine has already effectively shrunk from 50 million in 1991. Right now, it's somewhere between 25 and 30 million.
Whoa, it's dying. The country is dying.
It's dying. It's dying multiple ways, right? Refugees to Europe, millions of refugees to Russia, millions of Ukrainians now becoming Russians, the casualties in the battlefield, right? It's dying so many ways. And simply, bad health care and high suicide rates and everything else. It's Antony Blinken, what the U.S. is demanding of the Kiev regime ruling elite is you have to sacrifice the future of your country to let some future sliver rump state of Ukraine to be brought under our control in NATO. That's exactly what they're saying.
That is
and this is the death knell of Ukraine.
And all of these people are waving flags saying, we support Ukraine, we support Ukraine. Like, that, just astonishing. It is shocking to me. Mark, one last, I'm sorry, before I let you go, I got to get you to say something about Georgia. Look, as I've said it before to my audience, I consider all of this stuff to be one global war that is being fought out.
This is all part of World War III right now.
Yeah,
it's all part of World War III.
That are being done through proxies at this point. And
we've seen the conflict in Ukraine, in Africa, now in Syria, the regime change attempt in. You could even make an argument that the attempted presidential coup by the president in South Korea could possibly be connected to Ukraine.
America didn't have much to say as that man was taking dictatorial powers.
Yeah. The U.S. wants the South Korean military-industrial complex pumping out arms and gear for the Ukraine conflict continuously, not the little bit that they've given so far. And the left-dominated parliament in South Korea is against it. So
kudos to them. I mean, they came out. I mean, they were fighting them. Well, fighting cameras, barricades. They were holding the line for their parliament to say no. Kudos to them on that front. But Georgia, is this going to be another Ukraine? It seems that the Georgian prime minister is hell-bent that it is not going to be another Ukraine. He even goes so far as to say this will not be Maidan 2.0.
Be another Maidan.
Yeah, this is not going to happen.
So obviously at this point,
no, please go for it.
Yeah, obviously at this point, the important thing is the Georgian police and security services and military are still behind the Georgian government. That is the most crucial thing, right? So obviously, you know, the recent elections prove that a majority of the population is behind the prime minister, but it's a close majority, right? Yeah. There's still 30, 35, 40% of the population that is all for becoming the next front against Russia, right? That want to be part of the West, whatever the cost, right? That's the way it is framed. It is framed as a geopolitical choice by the West themselves. So it's a really dicey situation. And what we're going to see next is dead protesters.
Yeah, right? That was my thought. Exactly.
We've already heard that Georgian TV actually caught protesters saying, we need corpses. People won't turn up unless we roll out some corpses, right? They said it exactly that, right? It was on Georgian TV. Now, hopefully, the Georgian people are aware enough now of this that it will be contained. But we don't know, right? And if you'll remember, in the first Maidan, all the evidence points to that it was actually Georgian snipers, right, who are now part of the Georgian International Legion in Ukraine, right, who were part of that. And they've filtered along with a bunch of other Kiev regime militiamen off the Maidan into Georgia now, right? The Georgian police have... The Georgian police have put out there that 1/3 of all the protesters they've detained are not Georgians.
Right.
They're Europeans or Ukrainians.
Right. So, man, I am very concerned about the Georgia thing because I agree with you. Like, eventually people are going to get killed. Last question. What is Russia thinking about this? Because they have to know that the entire point of this is to have another front, that Ukraine failed. We believe, I mean, net means net. People may not remember, but Georgia was noted in net means net. That it was like the attempts to get Georgia and Ukraine into NATO is seen by skepticism with Russia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Russia is clearly paying attention to what is taking place in Georgia.
Sure.
What is their thoughts about it and the way it's
right
going?
now? Their thoughts are right. They have to rely on. At some level, I'm sure they reached out to the Georgian government, the Georgian Dream Party. Do you need any help? And it has to remember the Georgian Dream Party is not pro-Russian.
Right.
They're just not rabidly anti-Russian. Right. That's the way. Right. They have their issues with Russia, but they don't want to be the next proxies against them. So Russia has very little influence to, or room to do anything here. They have to count. Russia's view of all of this is they are winning on the battlefield in Ukraine, and they have to stay laser focused on that, because everything else now is U.S. recognition that they've lost on the battlefield in Ukraine. So they try to spin all this destabilization up here in Syria, in Georgia, in Serbia, right, where there's more tension again right now because Kosovar Albanian forces have been sent into the Serb majority north of Kosovo. All of this, it is an attempt to destabilize the situation around Russia and say, stop. If you don't stop, we're going to keep poking you here and there and there and there, right? Because if we can't win on the battlefield, on the contact line in Ukraine, we will be the masters of destabilization that we are, and we will spin everything up all around you. The important takeaway is they are not giving up.
Yeah. And
this is not going to stop because Trump takes office again in 40 some days.
Would you call it the last gasp of the unipolar world?
That famous quote, the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born.
Yeah.
Right?
That's where, man, this has been.
Now is the time of monsters.
This is terrifying. Thank you for this, man. A fantastic breakdown. I have greatly enjoyed this breakdown. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sleboda1, on his YouTube channel at Real Politic with Mark Sleboda. Definitely check that out. And on Facebook at facebook.com/Gramsci. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it, Mark. You have a good one.
Thanks for having me.